everybody. I'm Gregg. I'm the Director of Life Planning at Vistamar School in El Segundo, California, and the Chair of the Data Trends and Analytics Committee. Welcome back to our last episode of DTA Today for this year, which will focus on financially generous institutions, transparency, and the unfortunate impact of scholarship displacement. As a reminder to our audience, today's session will be recorded and will be available on the Access member website following our presentation. You can also subscribe to the Access YouTube channel for a lot of wonderful content beyond DTA Today. And we'll try to save a bit of time at the end to address questions from members, but please feel free to use the Q&A as we go, and we'll be answering those as we're moving through our questions. So I'm pleased to introduce four wonderful panelists today who have a breadth of experience. And first is Patrick Wilson, who's the Director of Admissions, Marketing and Events at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. He's worked in college admissions for nearly 20 years and served as the president of the Pacific Northwest Association for College Admissions Counselors in 2020 and 2021. We're also joined by Chad Spencer, who's the Vice President of Enrollment Management at Centre College in Danville, Kentucky. He has worked in admissions and financial aid for 25 years and served as a Senior Associate Dean of Admissions and Director of Financial Aid at Davidson College from 2005 to 2023. He's dedicated to college access and affordability initiatives and has been instrumental in the development of need-based financial aid models to increase Pell Grant recipient enrollments to the institutions where he's worked, and I think he's done a great job. If the data is any indication, PJ Petrone is the co-director of college counseling at Marymount High School in Los Angeles. He has been at Marymount for 12 years, during which time he's also been a board member and board chair for the Colleges That Change Lives organization. His time in admissions was spent at Whitman College and the New York Institute of Technology and University of Rhode Island. And lastly, we have Emily Liang, who is an Oakland native and a senior at Stanford studying science, technology, and society. As a first-generation low-income student, Emily participated in USC's Bovard Scholars Program. After a concerted effort, she received several large scholarships, such as the Coca-Cola and the Dell scholarships, to cover her college tuition. However, once she got to Stanford, she experienced the struggles of scholarship displacement and navigating those murky waters. Given her experience, she has been a student voice on NPR's Marketplace podcast, sharing her experiences with scholarship displacement. So thank you all for joining us. Now we can get to the meat and potatoes of this. So my first question for you all is, how do colleges balance the need for financial sustainability with the commitment to providing generous financial aid packages? And what strategies have you seen that effectively support both goals? So how can they stay afloat and make sure students have unrestricted access? Patrick, maybe would you like to jump in as our representative, one of our representatives from the college side?
Sure. I mean, I think, something that we sometimes float around our office is just the concept that, yes, students have to afford our institution, but we also have to afford the students because we do have a budget and we're a tuition-driven institution like so many are. And so finding the balance not only in obviously how we're discounting and how we're supporting through scholarships, the fact that we highly encourage a student to bring in outside scholarships because that can, in some cases, still provide us with the revenue, right? Like those are real dollars compared to a scholarship that we're generally offering that is not based on real dollars. It's simply invisible and tuition discounting. It's the monopoly money of this process. And so trying to find the balance between that, I think in some cases it's a matter of how and where we recruit. And I know that it's not always a popular thing that we don't visit every single low-income high school or Title IV high school, Title I titles, but thinking about how do we balance those recruitment initiatives to ensure we have a diverse class in all the ways of diversity while still being able to afford both sides of things.
Chad, what have you seen on your side?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Patrick hit on a lot of really important points. And I find myself thinking about my experiences at three different institutions, all a little bit different in terms of the resources available, particularly in supporting student financial aid. And the models were different in that in my time at Davidson is very heavily need-based driven. Where I am here at Center, there's much more dedicated to merit scholarshiping and general merit scholarships in particular. And prior to that, at Lenore Ryan University in North Carolina, my alma mater, granted, this was the 90s, so it was far different than also much more of a general merit scholarship driven model, but also quite a bit of loan volume too, moving through the financial aid office and passed on to students. But Patrick's point about recruitment of a diverse applicant pool is key in helping colleges to sustain themselves financially speaking, because there has to be that balance between students who have higher levels of financial need and those who have lower levels of financial need and everyone in between. I think it's, though, for all of us, right, our duty, if you will, to allow access to the greatest number of students we possibly can and to find ways to responsibly support them. The fact of the matter is resources play a huge role in our ability to be responsible in awarding aid, yet we also have to be really honest with ourselves and oftentimes with the students who we're recruiting and working to enroll to our institutions about what's a best choice for them. And so financial aid officers, I think, have the responsibility of truly counseling and not only thinking about what's best for the institution, but also what's best for the student and oftentimes for their families as well as they think about what the responsible financial decisions are for themselves.
Great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That counseling from financial aid is so critical, and it's such a missed opportunity. I think our families are afraid to call or think that they're imposing on the busy workers of the colleges and universities, when in reality they're an amazing untapped resource in many cases.
If I can jump back in on that, Greg, I
Yeah.
think now so more than ever, right? Your statement is true because this process has become so scary because of the federal failure that people are unsure of what they're doing. They're afraid to ask the wrong questions. And I think a lot of times they're afraid to ask any question at all. Yet people in financial aid offices and admission offices are anxiously waiting by the phones, right, by their computers, and proactively making calls to people, just trying to offer that help, that assistance to move people through this process.
Yeah, I had a vision of the professor sitting in office hours with no students in there saying, "Please come talk to me." So hopefully we'll all do a better job and continue to do the work of encouraging families to sort of cross that barrier or cross that bridge. So moving on to question 2, unless Emily or PJ, did you have anything to add to that last question? Okay. So how do hard-earned external scholarships interact with institutional aid packages across your respective contexts? And what advice can you each offer students who are pursuing scholarships to complement their need-based aid? So Emily, you put your initials next to that one, so I know it's one that you're eager to answer. So if you would love to start us off, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of scholarships oftentimes get sent to the college directly and not to the student. And so when that happens, that usually cuts into the scholarships that the college will provide to you. That can be a little bit discouraging at times because I feel like reflecting back on my high school experience, if I had known I wouldn't be able to use most of my scholarships because Stanford was giving me so much aid, I probably wouldn't have worked as hard for scholarships. But I think going into, as you're rolling in with college decisions, it's definitely gives you a peace of mind to know that finances are not as big of a worry when you have a bunch of scholarships to kind of lessen that financial burden. So I think either way, like still working really hard to get scholarships is really important to kind of make sure that you're optimizing all your choices at the end. But I also think that it's important to note that sometimes these scholarships cannot be used for things like books or room fees or things like that. It's usually directly sent to the college.
Mhm. So did you feel like you had any transparency around that? I know that's within the realm of the school getting the scholarship package. Were the scholarship providers transparent with you about how money was going to be allocated and what it could or could not be spent on?
Yeah, the scholarships themselves were pretty transparent because I think there are certain rules and guidelines that they have to follow. I felt the most surprised kind of on Stanford's end. I felt like I had to do a lot of like reaching out to folks and students who had a similar background as me to see how they were utilizing their scholarships. What are the best ways to kind of like finesse my scholarship? And so I think I've had a lot of meetings with Stanford's financial aid office where they couldn't give me like a specific answer, but I think the lack of transparency usually falls on the college side, not on the scholarship side. And a lot of my scholarships have worked with me to kind of save it up for grad school if that's an option. So there's definitely options for that.
Right. And I remember, for those of you who don't know, Emily and I worked together when she was applying to college. So I've cherry picked her for this presentation, but I distinctly remember sharing the excitement about all of the awards that you were receiving for your hard work and trying to figure out how you were going to sort of utilize those to the maximum amount that you could get out of it. And then to hear you on NPR was so discouraging because it felt like that work was diminished a little bit, but I know you made the best use of your resources as you always do to capitalize on that.
For sure.
PJ, did you have anything that you wanted to contribute for that conversation?
I mean, it's always such a struggle for students to navigate this and be able to know what they're really getting into. And I mean, if I have a criticism, it's that transparency is always so hard to come by on the front end, and it's not until we're living it that we realize where we've ended up. But I mean, that's not something that's new. That's something that we've all been dealing with for years and years, and we're always asking for more. And I think that there's steps being made, and we're going to hear more about those as we progress this morning. But I don't think that it can ever be too much transparency. And I think that this year is especially frustrating given the delays and the uncertainty that everyone's experiencing around the FAFSA. So I think we're all just hanging on for the ride along with the normal twists and turns that we're used to.
Yeah. Chad and Patrick, just a follow-up question on that. Are your offices having deliberate conversations about that element of the financial aid before they go out on the road to recruit students? Or I can recall being in the training meetings before we hit the road, and it all felt a little bit superficial, and there were always questions that came up on the road that I didn't know. But this specifically feels like it's such an important topic to be primed for.
Yeah, and there's no easy answer to it either. Yeah, every good financial aid question can be responded to with "it depends," right? Leading into it, because colleges are all so very different. We all have our own policies, but we could connect this question number 2 to number 10 really easily.
Yeah.
Our question of what's one sweeping change? A change that would benefit students extremely well would be to remove the the federal regulation surrounding total cost of attendance, because when it comes to students who are bringing outside resources with them, if they're also receiving any federal aid, where we're really stuck is we can't go beyond the total cost of attendance in awarding financial aid, regardless of its source. Right, even if it's the Coca-Cola scholarship, even if it's Dell, even if it's Gates, it doesn't matter what it is. You can't go beyond the total cost of attendance for your institution, and that leaves very little wiggle room and flexibility when it comes to allowing students to use every or even most dollars of those larger outside scholarships, particularly at places that are already generous in their awarding practices. So Stanford's an excellent example. It does a wonderful job of meeting financial need, but it still deals with the same federal regs as the rest of us, where we know once we've hit that total cost of attendance ceiling, it's over. We can't continue beyond that because then we're not compliant.
Right. And there are so many hidden costs that creep in after you get past that total cost of attendance.
Right. And that doesn't remove the need for transparency, right? It's not an excuse for institutions not being transparent. We should have plainly and clearly on our websites what our outside scholarship policies are, because there are places who are going to limit the amount of the outside scholarship that may be applied towards the student's cost of attendance, right? In an effort to control institutional expenses. So if there's institutional aid as a part of an aid award, it might be that $5,000 or $10,000 of the outside scholarship can go towards the student's total cost of attendance, and then anything beyond that begins to reduce institutional aid that's already in place. That's some amount. It may not be dollar for dollar, maybe some percentage basis, but most institutions are going to have some sort of policy in that regard, and not everyone has that clearly explained on websites.
Right. Or in a place where you can find it quickly.
Yeah, which may not be a website, right?
Yes. My favorite is getting my information from social media about colleges changes first. Well, Willamette, speaking of generous schools, in 2020 introduced a tuition transparency initiative that reduced the cost of attendance by nearly 20%. So Patrick, with that in mind, can you talk about the sort of 4-year span of what you're seeing after that initiative was launched, and what, if any, changes are noticeable from the admission side and campus culture and DEI initiatives as well?
Yeah, so we did a tuition reset. I was not here at the time, but we were able to reduce tuition. And it was really just a response to the fact that, the sticker price cost was ballooning. I think at that point we were approaching $70,000, which we're now reapproaching $70,000. We were able to hold tuition actually for 2 years at that rate. And have now had to increase slightly just to deal with, inflation that, our dining hall pays the same amount for eggs that y'all do. So, thinking about some of that sort of stuff, but, we were able to reframe some of the conversation around the cost not necessarily equating to quality, that this idea that we had to increase cost every year and kind of keep our ear to the ground of what our neighbors to the north or the south of, you're going to be this, we'll be about that. So that when people looked at the price, they said, oh, these are all equally great institutions, without actually having to dig into what it means to be a strong institution and some of those external recognitions that are not rankings, but memberships in honor societies or professional, associations and things of that nature. That this idea that, the tagline we used was price does not equal prestige. I think when it then comes to talking with students and families about that, we're very open about saying we're $10,000 less, with the then follow-up of you will see financial aid that is comparable by the ratio. You will get a $10,000 you will get $10,000 more in scholarship at another institution near us, but they also cost $10,000. But I think from at least the outside perspective, when people are looking at all of the cost, they're not seeing, wow, you're $80,000, we're at least under 70, which is still not great, to then hopefully provide the rest of the context and education of no one is paying that. So every single student gets a merit scholarship. And some people go, every student? And we say, yes, you've done work, you've done good work. Some people do better work, everyone doesn't get the same amount. There is a range there, but at least that brings that initial cost down, from 50 plus for tuition down. The 67 number includes tuition and fees, room and board, that at least we can start to have a conversation, because we do hear from school counselors, college counselors, I won't recommend a school that costs more than. And so it allows us to hopefully re-engage that conversation when it comes to cost and value, that our students are graduating in 4 years. If you're doing a dual degree program, you get a master's degree in X, Y, or Z. Like, we can hopefully guide some of that. And then there are some people that, of course, are paying more to help us support the students who need additional assistance. It's the airplane. Not everybody's paying the same amount. The person in first is supporting the person in the back. And so at least we're able to kind of do a little bit different in terms of the financial aid modeling down the road. In terms of diversity and whatnot on campus, it has changed a little bit over the course of the years, and I don't exactly know the trajectory because I wasn't here before, but we are a more diverse institution, Pell, in terms of students of color, those aspects of things. And so at the end of the day, I think it's helped in that regard.
Yeah. Even just lowering the sticker price, it opens a conversation more than having that $100,000 number that we keep seeing in the media that is seemingly fast approaching. So Emily, you hit on this, and I knew we were going to be running into this, but for our fourth question, I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about how you navigated some of your experiences, and maybe just to put a positive light on things, where were the supports that really helped you figure out how this was all operating, how you could be more efficient about your approach to it, and how you could maximize the potential of what you did receive?
Yeah, I think definitely tapping into resources that were specific to first-gen low-income students. So when I joined Stanford, I was part of a program specifically for first-gen low-income students. I also had Gregg, who was kind of advising me throughout this time when making decisions about which college to choose, and really breaking down what the financial aid package meant, like what that meant in normal terms. Like, this would be used for room and board, this would be for food, housing, things like that. So really like asking questions and reaching out to people who have experienced this already. So students who are older than you at that respective college, those have been really helpful resources to just understand the financial aid package a little bit more and apply it to the next 4 years of your college experience. Yeah, I think that's been the most helpful, and also just scheduling time with the financial aid office at my school. I always try to hop on a Zoom call with them to like ask specific questions, because like Chad said, it really depends on your specific circumstance. So when you have someone who's an expert and knows kind of your background and context, that is really helpful.
Great. And so you mentioned sort of the formal structures, but then how did you identify those informal systems of support? And was that getting involved in the dorms and then identifying other students that were on your floor, or did you pop into a meeting for a club or an organization and find that extra layer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, at any college, there's a lot of people who come together based on their specific identities. And so I remember before I even stepped foot on campus, there were I also, it was like my first year was online. So I think there was more of like an online presence. So there were a bunch of group chats for first gen low income students, for Asian students, for students who were Koch scholars. And so I had that virtual community to tap into, and I was able to I remember at one point there was a large spreadsheet of all the Koch scholars at Stanford. And so I just started reaching out to them, asking them like, hey, how did you end up using your Koch scholarship? How did you kind of navigate scholarship displacement? And that was a really helpful resource. So just like if you ask around, I'm sure there are people who are in a similar situation as you or might have more insights than you. I also remember just like, and this is not just like a freshman year thing, like a couple months ago, I met someone who is actively applying to scholarships while in college. And so we had a full-blown conversation about scholarship displacement and how to best use our scholarships at Stanford.
Great. Well, now you're the resource. The tables have turned. So, PJ, this one's probably a little more directed to you, but as independent schools, it can be difficult to get a complete picture of families' finances. But for those first-gen, low-income students who enliven our campus communities, how is your school or schools that you know of, how are they preparing students for the economic realities of college? We have financial aid nights, but typically those are just a rundown of how your financial aid is going to be calculated, not how to approach the process necessarily.
Right. So we were lucky enough at Marymount to be introduced to Paul Martin and the college money method a couple years ago, and look through his programming and his curriculum. And we're utilizing that as one of our main resources for assisting families. He has programming that he does at all grade levels. And that will allow families to know what the cost of attendance looks like moving forward. It allows them to know how loans come into play. It allows them to know how calculations are done. And then as you get closer into junior and senior year, he's looking more at the pragmatic side of how do you fill out the FAFSA? How do you fill out the profile? He even does a session in the spring about how to potentially appeal a financial aid award letter and say, is there a way that I might be able to get a little bit more? Or I have this update for you, or I think you misunderstood what I said, or what our circumstances are. I found that to be really quite encompassing of all the different topics that have been of concern over the years. We had a consortium of schools that we were working with, and we were able to also get some translation done on that programming so that any of our families, I believe we did it with Spanish and Korean here in LA, which got a broader swath of those non-English first language families. And that was helpful. That helped with accessibility. Otherwise, the other way I could think about this is that we're assigning our college counselors within the first year at Marymount. So that allows us to have some conversations earlier with those families that we're most concerned about. So it's kind of on us to be able to be forward-thinking and proactive in saying, hey, I know that you think this is going to work, and that wherever very expensive place, maybe six figures is going to work, but like we need to think about if this is going to be the best path given the resources that your family has to be able to dedicate to this.
Great. Yeah, they will make it work is one of my most cringy lines that families share with me, because if you could make $80,000-$90,000 work, you probably would have made that happen already. And it probably won't happen in a month and a half, which is usually the time frame they have left to do that. So you mentioned one of the options for is College Money Matters. There's also College Funding Coach. There's Smart Track. There's an emergence of these companies that are serving as a similar model to our test prep companies that are coming in to provide education for our families in an area that we have expertise, but not nearly as much as what they're able to acquire in their roles. So if anybody has any of those organizations, if you wouldn't mind sharing those in the chat. I know that's a common thing that our audience likes is ideas to bring back to their teams. So if you have any great ideas or options, when I used to be at Drew School in San Francisco, one of our alumni happened to be a financial planner. So on a Saturday when we were proctoring the mock SAT, he came in and met with all of the families to do 15-minute individual consults. And that was encouraged by his employer as a pro bono outreach effort. So getting creative with your alumni can be another great way, because a lot of our alumni in independent schools do have some wealth management knowledge. All right, so I see a few comments in there. So our next question is, to what extent can we as college counselors prepare students for their on-campus financial aid experience? And this is an extension of what PJ's already been talking about, but I'd love to hear from everybody. How do you get students to the resources? How do they even understand what a bursar's office versus the financial aid office versus an excess check versus what I experienced was they hadn't released my finances to the financial aid office, and I got this alarming note that they were going to block me from classes and essentially lock me out of everything. And I scrambled to the line of the financial aid office to try to figure out what was going on. But how do we get our students ready for this, especially those that are high need? Or how can we prepare them with some conversations about where to go when they get to campus?
Greg, I think one really, really great piece of advice that can be given to students is just as they are leaving high school is check your college email account for one, and check it often, because believe it or not, that's the way in which most colleges are sharing official information. But yeah, I say that somewhat facetiously, but this is also an area where colleges, if we're honest with ourselves, could stand pretty tremendous improvements. We're talking about onboarding here right now, and the information that we need to be providing to students in a clear, understandable way, where they can find it all in one place, where they can easily link to the information and the forms that they need, and where they can quickly and easily access the support services they need to help them move through the process. Because with increasing numbers of first generation college going students, we can no longer work according to the expectation that families are simply going to know how to navigate the process. And plus, it's grown even more complex. So, the question of how do I know the difference between the bursar, the financial aid office, the controller, and everyone else with these titles I've never encountered before. So we could stand to do a better job. And I think most places are working to do that, right? I should probably say all. I hope it's all. So we need to be more clear in our communications and to try to educate earlier as well. And now with Zoom being what it is, and granted, we all have great fatigue, it's easier than ever before to hop on a call, invite people, right, en masse, and then share information with them. And then two, they get to see the faces of the people who are on that campus. They get to hear them say that they invite contact and that their positions exist for the purpose of helping families and students to navigate the process successfully so that they can be successful once they're there. And then when students are on campus, then hopefully that then translates into a greater level of comfort in approaching the people who hopefully then they've already met by the time they arrive, when they find themselves at points in time where they need assistance.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have some input?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that. I mean, it behooves all of us to make sure that our campus partners understand the change of demographics. At my last institution, the last enrolling class I helped with was 50% first gen. And during the enrollment process, we were not getting the same uptick in like advising appointments and things of that nature. And not only was that, a pandemic-y class, but it was also just a very different class in terms of where they were coming from and experience. And we kept having to explain to people, this is a different class. You have to reset your expectations, and we have to change our communication to differently engage people. And, we got there as the summer went on. But I think that's the other flip side. We do put out a lot of information. Perhaps it's too much in some cases. And to have people say, I can't find it. Okay, let me help you find it. But then there is the point that I need you to engage with the material we've provided and get back to me if you don't understand it. We had a huge effort this year to try and get social security numbers from students because they're not putting them on their applications. And I get that, right? Like, we've beat it into everybody that this is a very special thing that you should tell no one ever, but we cannot connect your FAFSA to your record without it. Somebody called yesterday to provide their social security number. So then my next question was, would you like a deposit extension? Because you're not getting a FAFSA tomorrow. But we've literally been sending out that message since January, and somebody decided on, April 24th. I guess I'll get around to, let's kick that process. So it's providing it in a clear manner and figuring out the best way to do that all the way through the process. But also people gotta read and they gotta engage with us to get that information.
Yeah. Well, you might have seen me smirking. That's because my students just opened their Common Apps and they're trying to text their parents to get their social securities. As I'm saying, they're not going to reply with that.
No.
They're going to have to wait until you get home.
You know, it would be an interesting exercise, or really a project undertaken. Maybe Axis could be at the lead on this and work with Patrick and me and others. But if we created something that's a glossary of terms, or commonly used language in this process, and then that could arm counselors with what they need to help students to understand what they may encounter as they're working through the process and once they arrive to the college campus. Mm-hmm. As I say it out loud, it almost sounds a little bit silly, but I think for people to at least have been exposed to some of this stuff will prepare them, even if just a little bit, for what they're going to eventually encounter once they are on college campuses. And I don't know, Emily, maybe you have some stories from your time when you were first entering into college related to this. The student experience is what I'm most interested in hearing and understanding, so I can know, okay, where is it that there's either miscommunication, misunderstanding, or anything else that's may prove a barrier for students.
Chad, I'm going to make a pitch to Duolingo to add college admissions as another language for us.
Yeah, I think the glossary idea is really good, because I remember going into, when I got my financial aid package, I didn't even know like half of what it meant. And also, as I was speaking to the financial aid officers, I also wasn't sure like what all of this meant. So I think having a glossary to like understand and track what it exactly is would be really helpful for students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and more financial aid case studies, adding that into the programming for our schools and comparing letters, looking at how the different schools are using similar yet different language and the nuance of how they sort of lump things together, or they break it up in semesters. It's so tricky to figure out. So, all right, I guess we have our new charge. We walk away from every webinar with new work to do. So, all right. So the next question, we're closing in on the last of our formal questions, and we're going to open it up to the Q&A. I realized after I said it, and thank you for the person who let us know, the chat is not visible to everybody. So we'll put some of those comments in, but for the Q&A, we'll open that up. So if you have questions, start dropping those in. But Patrick, at Willamette, you've taken a clear stance in trying to make financial aid and the process more accessible. Some of your colleagues up in the Pacific Northwest are doing pre-reads on financial aid for juniors, even for students that aren't applying to their institution necessarily. Where is that coming from? It feels like when I was in the Pacific Northwest, it was a very concerted effort among those schools. And as I sweep the country going to visit other places, I'm not hearing that as much. So is there anything you all are talking about up there or collaborating on, or is it just an organic commitment?
I mean, as a native Oregonian, I think we're just nice people up here, and we like to be helpful. I mean, as Willamette's a member of the Northwest Five with Whitman and Puget Sound Reed and Lewis and Clark, and as somebody who joins the deans and directors conversations now, in my conversations, we've not sat there and go, okay, let's together solve this problem. I think it does come just from this organic nature of what we've done and what we are doing doesn't work. Like, we have to do a better job of clarifying what this looks like. I think in some cases, perhaps it comes from the selfish place of, if people just look at the price tag and don't understand the rest of the process, we're losing students that we need to enroll to ensure that the institution continues. But I think it's just a matter of, where can we fill in the process? What are the things that we're consistently hearing that people are confused about, and trying to be solution oriented about it? And so, like, last year, We did, I think, 4 financial aid webinar style programs. This year we did 6, and we did 3 in the fall that were financial aid 101, partially because we didn't have anything else to talk about, right? Like we didn't know how all of this was going to work. So we were a little bit forced to hand, but it actually worked out really well because then we did 3 here in the spring from January on. And even before we had FAFSA information, we did financial aid 102. This is what you're going to get. This is what your award is going to look like. Please read all the pages. You know, we showed what they actually get. Here's how to do a comparison. Here's what we look at when you call us and say we want more money or we need more money. Like we stepped through, and by dividing the 101 from the 102, we were actually able to focus more on both sides. And then we proceed with doing similar presentations during fall events for juniors and whatnot. And so I think just having that where it's out into the sort of ether to be able to say, we're trying to help you. I mean, I think that's something that we get back from parents is like, thank you so much for just doing anything. Like, I mean, it's almost like Sue and I could get on Zoom on a Monday night and just like, you know, put up dollar signs and people would be happy that, you know, we're talking about anything, but they can actually leave and go, oh my gosh, I feel like I know this better. So I think that part is just, again, it's that organic nature of we're just trying to help everyone out because it helps us out in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the self-directed learning versus instruction. It helps to have somebody explain that context and the subtleties of it all. All right, so my final question for you all, and maybe we'll let class out early today and let everybody run outside. But how do you think we can change things without making college free to make this process better for students and better for college counselors and better for families? So magic wand moment, what can we be doing? And maybe we put this out there and some of our colleagues hear it and share it, and it takes off.
I think, I mean, Chad, I think kind of touched on it very early on, but I was thinking about this earlier, and admission officers in particular, you know, especially the first year ones we send out on the road and say, go forth and spread the good word. We have to train them better in financial aid. It's not enough to explain, make sure everybody knows what the psychology program does. Like, you have to know how to talk about financial aid, and not in a, I mean, there are a lot of questions that are, it depends, because people don't bring us their FAFSA at a college fair, but like, people have to know and they have to understand how it works, but also in some cases what the limitations are. Like, we have to be honest, we're not giving everybody a full ride. And so what are the other things we can do, and what's the reality, and where does the limit, where do we reach the limit within our institution? Because it just sets everything up, I think, from that college search process in a much clearer way.
I thought the limit did not exist, Patrick.
Well, what?
Famous movie quotes, the limit does not exist.
Except it does.
Yeah. So, Chad, how about you? What do you think we could be doing to really just elevate the experience and create a space where families feel safe spending their money and giving it to colleges in a way that they're understanding what they're getting?
Yeah, one big change would be what I referenced earlier, which is lifting this cost of attendance cap that can be harmful to students and displace those outside scholarships. So, or displace the aid that they otherwise would have received because of the outside scholarship. I'd love to see that go away. Also, too, and this has been an idea for a long time, if I can figure out a way to make it work, then I won't have to work as long as it looks like I might before I retire. But it is, how can we develop a universal financial aid calculator that's applicable to, you know, all four-year colleges and universities, where families can plug in their own financial data and in return understand what it's going to cost based upon where the student, you know, chooses to enroll in college. I don't think in a world of AI everything that this is outside the realm of possibility. And I think the first time I thought about it was well before AI existed in the way that it does today. So somebody out there far smarter than me can figure this out. so that would, I think, make a huge change, because ultimately what it gets at is this need to educate students and their families and their mentors and counselors and everyone else earlier on this process, so that they can know that college actually is possible, that it's accessible to them,
Mhm.
and that it can also at the same time be affordable. May not be to the institution of their dreams where it's going to be most affordable, but it can be affordable. There are thousands of us across the country, and having tools and education in place can allow people to gain confidence and comforts that college can be a part of the equation for themselves or for their students.
Great, thank you. Emily, I'm going to kick it over to you. You're next over on the screen, and then we'll finish up with PJ.
Yeah, I think kind of to everyone's point, just spreading more awareness about also the unspoken costs of college that aren't included in all the financial aid packages. I think that helps contextualize your decision a little bit more, and it shows that there are, even if like I remember I got a full ride for USC, and when I like dug deeper and talked to the financial aid officers, it was like full ride for just the academic side, so not including room and board. And so the terminology behind that can also be very unclear to folks who have never gone through that process or have family that have gone through that process. I think on the scholarship side, giving students more autonomy over their scholarships would also be really helpful, because there are a lot of costs that come up, like medical bills, or if you need a new bike to get across campus, or you need books, that can, having control over where to spend your money is definitely a really good way of making sure that you're making smart decisions.
Yeah, thank you. PJ?
In our dreamy world. I think it's challenging because I think the sticker price is not what everybody's going to pay. And I think that that can be extremely intimidating for families as they enter into this, because they may feel like, well, that's completely unobtainable, when it might work out because there's a high level of institutional discount rate at that institution or whatever. So in some ways, I wish it wasn't so much of a situation where some tuitions are so inflated beyond what the cost of actually educating the student is, and didn't act as a deterrent and a potential issue of inequity in how students are treated and able to receive funds, or yeah, I think that causes a big challenge, and that comes back to the transparency piece, and we're all working towards it, but it's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah. Well, I just dropped in the chat for everyone a little bit of encouragement. If you have any questions, we have about 10 minutes left to spare, but we're happy to end things early if everybody feels like they've got everything they need for financial aid and they're ready to go hit the road and share that knowledge.
To something PJ just said about like trying to get towards transparency, I would just say, like, as the person who sends out a crap ton of emails about everything and hosts, webinars and things of that nature, the most helpful thing, and people can't follow up on everything, I get it, but like if we're doing something as individual institutions that is irritating, confusing, whatever, posting on a Facebook page or a listserv that colleges continue to irritate you does not change it. The person who's doing that doesn't know they're being irritating. We have to be told we're being irritating. And I'm happy to have that feedback because we will work to improve it. But it can't just be the anonymous complaint because it doesn't do anything. And we've seen that.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, if they're doing something right, let them know so that they keep doing it.
That's also really nice. We appreciate that too.
For
Just
sure.
a pat on the back, and there's a lot of good stuff going on. There's so many more initiatives and attempts to share knowledge with Zoom. I know the colleges are working tirelessly, and they've added a huge amount of programming to make people aware of what's going on. So that should definitely be recognized and appreciated. And we've got a lot of work left to do, but hopefully we're moving in the right direction, and we can get past this year's FAFSA craze into a little bit more of calm and stability next year, fingers crossed. But thank you all for your experience, your knowledge, your insights, and for being candid and sharing your stories. As I said, we'll have this posted in the near future on the Access YouTube page, or channel. If you're interested in checking that out, please do. And thank you all for another great season. We've wrapped up season 4 of DTA Today, which began in the pandemic and was a conversation that was intended to be like those chats you have after a conference presentation, where it's fun and you're bustling with ideas and you run back to your office with something to share. And we hope you got that from this season. We hope to bring that to you next season, and we look forward to it. And if anybody has any ideas on topics, please feel free to reach out to me or anybody on the DTA committee. We'd be happy to create some webinars that serve your needs. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day and a great
Thanks, Greg.
weekend.